Hey there, it's Codefinity, and in this video, we are going to just do a walkthrough, some examples of some functions, and let's just get into it right now. So here we have a regular JavaScript function, a function declaration. We're using the function keyword to declare a function. Right over here, we just give it a name of some sort. Usually that name is some type of a verb because functions are reusable blocks of code that typically are supposed to perform some type of an action. So a verb is a good general rule for regular functions. In this spot here, we have a what's called a parameter, and a parameter is nothing but a placeholder because if we expect this function to double, well, then we're going to need a placeholder to feed in the additional information, in this case, the number that we want to double. So this is called a parameter. After that, we have some braces that establish what's called function scope. And then in here, we simply perform our action. In this case, we're multiplying the number that's passed in by 2. And we typically want to have a return keyword on our function. That way our function performs an action and returns the output. From there, we're free to do whatever we want to it. In this case, after we have doubled our number, all we are trying to do is to log it. So that's everything about this one here. What we're doing is invoking or calling the function double. And when we call the function, we pass in an argument. That argument will get bound to this parameter. So a little bit of just enunciating the keywords associated with the stuff. So that's your run-of-the-mill JavaScript function. Let's move on from there. We can have the same function and we can write it using arrow syntax. So in this case, it's much cleaner actually, right? We don't have this function keyword and everything. So to be clear, I'll actually just split this. Let's see, split down so we can just see them. This is exactly the same thing written in arrow syntax. So this is really just another way to write the function. It doesn't necessarily change anything in this particular case. Almost never does it behave any differently. And what we have here is, well, you can kind of see here, we just have the same placeholder or parameter, just like here. And then we're using this arrow syntax. And in this particular case, because this function is just a single statement, we don't even need any braces. We don't put the semicolon. We don't use the return keyword. The number comes in and it spits out number times 2, all in one line. So, all right. So moving on, we'll close this out. Let's go on to example number 3. So in this case, it's just another example of an arrow function, but in this case, there are multiple statements with multiple areas we can return depending on the situation. If the score is more than 90, we're going to return A. Otherwise, we keep going. And since, even though we're using an arrow function, since there are multiple statements in here, we do have to use the braces, the semicolons, and the return keyword explicitly, but it's still written as an arrow function. So arrow functions will work with multiple statements, or if it's only a single statement, you can really make it short and sweet. Either way, the key difference is you use this arrow syntax and then you declare it like a variable using your const keyword. Otherwise, everything else here works the same. And now we take it to the next level a little bit where we have this built-in function, set timeout, that just comes with JavaScript. And what's interesting is that we're actually passing a function into another function. And that's something that you can only do in certain languages such as JavaScript. Whenever you see this pattern, which is extremely prevalent in JavaScript, especially when you work in the browser, front end code, you're going to see this callback function pattern. In this case, set timeout, notice that it's a function. We're calling it with these parentheses. And the first argument to this function is actually another function. And it really makes sense here for set timeout that we call it a callback function because that's exactly what happens, all right? Because the second argument is the number of milliseconds that we want to wait. So that's 2 seconds. And after 2 seconds, this function gets called back. So a callback function, especially when we're talking about set timeout, is a really good example because it introduces this concept of passing a function into another function. And in this case, it really syncs up with what's happening. After 2 seconds, we're going to call this function back and it's going to run. So that's a callback function.